He was a lonely rancher who lived where roads ended and voices disappeared, and silence became his only companion. Days passed without names spoken, and nights stretched long under empty skies where memories felt heavier than the stars. Loss had taught him to keep moving, and pain had trained him to trust no one. He worked the land with tired hands, not to build a future, but to escape the past that followed him everywhere. People once mattered to him, but fate had taken them one by one, leaving only habits and survival behind. He chose distance because closeness had always ended in heartbreak. His ranch stood alone, just like him, surrounded by land that echoed his emptiness. He believed solitude was safer than hope, and quiet was better than disappointment. Yet deep inside him lived a question he never spoke. What if life still had something waiting? That unanswered question pushed him forward on the path that night. A path that would lead him into danger, fear, and a destiny he never imagined. The question he carried pushed him deeper into the night until the land changed without warning and the air felt watched rather than empty. The horse slowed as if sensing danger before his mind accepted it, and the moonlight revealed shapes moving where none should exist. Before he could turn back, soft earth hardened beneath many feet, and a circle closed around him with perfect silence. Bows rose, not shaking hands, but steady ones, and blades caught the pale glow, without menace yet without mercy. His breath caught, while his instincts screamed to fight, but his body understood resistance would end everything. Voices did not shout, yet command filled the space, and he felt himself guided down from the saddle as ropes secured his wrists, firm but careful. The horse was led away unharmed, which confused him more than the capture itself. Eyes followed every movement he made, not with hunger for blood, but with measured focus, like judges reading truth from posture alone. The forest seemed to listen as they moved him forward through paths hidden from outsiders, where fireflies replaced torches and stars vanished behind branches. Fear walked beside him, yet something gentler followed, because no blow came and no insult stained the moment. Memories of warning stories echoed inside him, while reality unfolded differently, with dignity replacing cruelty at every step. He noticed symbols painted on arms carrying history rather than threat, and heard breathing steady, like people protecting something sacred. Time lost meaning as distance stretched until a clearing opened, revealing fires burning low and shelters shaped by care rather than conquest. He was placed before elders whose faces showed lines earned through survival and grief known deeply. Silence pressed heavier than chains as they studied him without hurry, and he felt stripped of lies simply by standing there. One woman stepped forward, her presence calm, yet powerful, and she removed the rope with a single motion that felt like trust offered, not granted. He understood then this moment was not about trespass alone, but about who he chose to be while surrounded by strangers. His past losses surfaced, yet instead of breaking him, they grounded his voice when he spoke truth simply without defense. The tribe listened, absorbing tone rather than language, and something shifted within the circle like a breath released. Night sounds returned as if permission had been given, and fear softened into fragile curiosity. Though still captured, he sensed a path opening where fate waited patiently, and the forbidden land revealed itself as a place of judgment deeper than law. Hands guided him forward with calm control, and the moment he expected pain never arrived. The women moved with discipline shaped by purpose rather than anger, and every step they took showed restraint learned through generations. His wrists remained free now, yet unspoken boundaries held him stronger than rope ever could. They offered water without words and allowed him to sit near the fire where warmth replaced dread. He noticed how they positioned themselves not to threaten, but to protect each other, and that quiet unity unsettled him more than force. One warrior checked his wounds from the journey with efficient care, then stepped back as if his body was no longer the focus, but his spirit was. He felt exposed not because he was weak, but because honesty was the only thing left to him. The fire reflected on their faces, revealing strength mixed with weariness and stories carved by survival. He sensed that violence was a choice they mastered yet refused unless required, and that knowledge humbled him deeply. When a child passed behind the circle, laughter briefly broke the tension, and he realized life continued here despite hardship. The elders spoke softly among themselves, weighing something heavier than his fate alone, and he waited without pleading because fear had loosened its grip. A woman with silver in her hair approached, and asked him to stand, then looked into his eyes long enough to see sorrow resting there. She nodded slightly, not in approval, but understanding, and motioned for food to be placed before him. Hunger surprised him because he had forgotten his body still needed care, and the act of being fed shifted something fragile inside. He ate slowly, aware that trust formed through actions rather than promises. Around him, the tribe resumed gentle movement, as if his presence no longer disrupted their rhythm. Night deepened and stars returned, peeking through branches, while drums echoed faintly from somewhere unseen. He realized captivity here meant observation rather than punishment, and that every breath he took was part of a silent trial. Though guarded, he was allowed rest, and given a blanket woven with care, which carried the scent of smoke and home. Lying there, he felt emotions collide: confusion, gratitude, regret, and a cautious spark of hope he had buried long ago. He understood harm had been withheld not out of mercy alone, but because they believed character revealed itself when fear lost its voice. Sleep finally came, carrying dreams not of escape, but of belonging he never dared imagine, and as dawn neared, the tribe watched quietly, knowing the true test had only begun. Morning light crept softly into the camp, and he woke with tension locked in his chest because freedom had not arrived with daylight. Guards remained near, yet their posture stayed relaxed, and their eyes held patience instead of threat. His hands were loosely bound again, not to hurt, but to remind, and the weight of that balance confused him more than chains. Every sound felt sharper as fear searched for danger that never came, and his mind struggled to understand restraint where brutality had been expected. He studied faces around him, hoping to read intent, but found only calm focus shaped by discipline. This uncertainty unsettled him because mercy without explanation left no ground to stand on. He waited for anger to surface or accusations to fall, yet silence answered every thought. Women moved through the camp caring for daily tasks, and children laughed nearby, untouched by his presence, which deepened his confusion. If he were truly a threat, life would have paused, yet nothing stopped. His heart raced while nothing chased him, and that contrast wore him down. He remembered past moments when fear had meaning and action followed, but here stillness carried weight. One guard met his eyes and nodded slightly, as if acknowledging his struggle rather than judging it. That simple gesture stirred emotion he had buried because it offered recognition without demand. Hunger returned, and again food was given calmly, without ceremony, reinforcing that his life held value even now. He expected questions, interrogation, or blame, yet none arrived, forcing him to confront his own conscience instead. Thoughts of escape flickered but faded because trust hovered fragile, and breaking it felt heavier than fear. He realized death would have been simpler than this quiet evaluation where intentions mattered more than mistakes. Every minute stretched as his mind replayed choices from the past, measuring them against the eyes watching him now. Confusion grew because the tribe seemed to seek truth rather than victory, and he wondered what truth they saw in him. A breeze carried voices singing softly somewhere distant, and the sound wrapped around his nerves, easing tension he had carried for years. He noticed how guards rotated, giving each other rest, showing care even within duty, and that humanity unsettled him deeply. When an elder passed, she paused briefly, studying him with neither kindness nor cruelty, just awareness, and he felt transparent before her gaze. Fear shifted shape, becoming less about survival and more about worth, because judgment without violence demanded honesty. He sensed that his fate depended on who he revealed himself to be when nothing forced his hand. The calm eyes around him reflected strength born from restraint, and slowly his breathing steadied as understanding began to form. This place did not rush decisions, and neither could he. Bound yet unharmed, guarded yet respected, he stood between endings and beginnings, realizing confusion was the doorway they expected him to walk through alone. Understanding arrived slowly as patterns revealed themselves through quiet order rather than spoken law, and he sensed authority woven into every movement around him. Decisions flowed from women whose presence carried history etched by endurance, and grief survived rather than displayed. Leadership here was not announced yet never questioned because survival had shaped a system where wisdom outweighed force. He watched how disputes ended before beginning, how voices lowered instead of rising, and how respect traveled downward rather than being demanded upward. Loss had taught them to value restraint because chaos once took too much and left lessons written in absence. Strength lived in coordination where each role mattered and no task stood beneath dignity. He noticed how elders guided without shouting, how warriors trained with patience, and how healers moved with purpose that steadied the entire camp. Children learned by observing care and accountability, together forming future grounded in balance. This structure confused him because power he had known relied on fear, while here authority rested on trust built through consistency. He felt himself measured against values deeper than obedience and realized the tribe asked whether he could exist within harmony rather than submit to command. A council gathered without ceremony, and silence framed discussion where each voice carried weight earned through experience. They spoke of boundaries, protection, and responsibility, using few words yet clear intent. He learned through listening that this land endured invasions and betrayals, teaching them vigilance tempered by mercy. Women led because they had rebuilt after devastation and guarded life with fierce compassion. The rule was simple yet demanding: act with respect, protect the vulnerable, and never let anger decide fate. He sensed that breaking these principles carried consequences more severe than punishment, because trust once broken damaged everyone. Observing this order humbled him because it reflected a discipline he lacked but longed for. His own life had drifted without guidance beyond survival, and here survival served something larger than self. He felt small, yet strangely safe, as if clarity replaced fear with purpose. Guards loosened their watch because presence itself enforced boundaries and community ensured balance. Meals were shared equitably, reminding him that care was deliberate rather than sentimental. He realized his treatment stemmed not from exception, but from standard applied to all. The tribe did not bend rules for sympathy nor harden them for pride, and that fairness settled his nerves. He considered how his actions might align or clash with these principles, knowing judgment remained ongoing. Responsibility pressed gently, urging him to choose awareness over impulse. He recognized that acceptance required contribution, not charm, and honesty over performance. As evening approached, the camp glowed with routine, and he felt included without invitation, simply by existing respectfully. The tribe's rule revealed itself not as dominance, but as collective resolve born from lost strength and survival, and within that framework he sensed a possibility to redefine himself through choices yet to come. Time moved forward without announcement, and he realized the trial had begun not with questions, but with observation that left no place to hide. No one asked him to speak, and no one listened for promises, because attention stayed fixed on how he behaved when he thought no one guided him. He was allowed to move within limits, and those limits tested patience more than strength. When water spilled, he reached to help without being told, and when a basket tipped, he steadied it quietly, then stepped back. Eyes noticed, yet faces remained neutral, offering no reward that could influence his intent. He learned quickly that hesitation revealed fear, while steady action showed respect. When a child stumbled, he reacted instinctively, catching her before she fell, and the smallest nod passed between watchers, acknowledging reflex over thought. Tasks appeared near him not as orders, but opportunities, and he chose to assist without seeking approval. He carried wood carefully, mindful of space, and waited his turn at meals, never reaching ahead. Fatigue pressed against his resolve, yet he maintained calm because effort here spoke louder than endurance alone. He felt moments when old habits urged him to explain himself, but silence demanded restraint, and he obeyed that unspoken rule. Women observed from distance and closeness, alike reading consistency across hours rather than moments. He noticed how one careless movement could echo longer than many careful ones, and that awareness sharpened his focus. When frustration surfaced, he stepped aside, breathing slowly until balance returned, and that choice did not go unseen. Judgment weighed how he treated the smallest duties because power here revealed itself through care. He sensed that kindness performed for attention would fail, while quiet reliability would endure. Evening brought colder air, and he offered his blanket to someone older without hesitation, then accepted another without pride. The exchange held meaning beyond warmth, and the watchers absorbed that meaning silently. He understood that every choice wrote a line in an invisible record, shaping his future within the circle. No voice praised him, yet ease grew subtly around his presence as tension loosened without notice. Children moved closer and elders lingered longer, which signaled progress more clearly than words. He felt pressure not to perform, but to remain genuine, because false effort would fracture under time. Hunger returned, and he waited patiently until invited understanding boundaries mattered more than appetite. When a task finished, he did not linger expecting thanks, and that absence of expectation marked him as trustworthy. Night arrived, and with it reflection on how unfamiliar judgment felt when rooted in patience rather than dominance. He realized they sought to learn who he was when nothing was demanded, because character revealed itself best there. By dawn, he sensed the scale had shifted slightly, though no verdict had formed. Judgment continued through watching, listening, and remembering, and he accepted that pace because rushing truth had cost him too much before. The next days unfolded with quiet challenges that revealed themselves through need rather than command, and he responded before thought shaped intention. When an elder limped from a long walk, he offered his shoulder steady and silent, matching pace without drawing notice. A young warrior returned with a torn arm, and he cleaned the wound, carefully following guidance without pride or impatience. Food was scarce, yet when his portion arrived, he divided it, naturally placing pieces where hunger showed strongest, then accepted what remained without complaint. No gesture sought recognition, and that absence carried weight among those watching. Respect flowed through how he waited for space, how he lowered his eyes when passing elders, and how he listened fully even when words were few. He learned names only when offered and remembered them with care, honoring identity rather than claiming familiarity. When tools broke, he repaired them patiently, using skills shaped by years alone, and returned them quietly. Fatigue tested him, yet he chose consistency over display, understanding endurance meant nothing without humility. He sensed moments crafted to tempt ego when praise hovered nearby, yet he stepped away, letting actions stand unclaimed. Trust built slowly through reliability that did not waver when unseen. When storms arrived, he secured shelters alongside others, sharing labor evenly, then stepped back as if equal effort required no witness. Children observed his patience, learning through example that strength could be gentle. He shared stories only when asked and spoke truth without embellishment, allowing silence to finish thoughts. Meals became moments of community where he waited for elders to begin and ensured others ate before he did. When disagreements arose nearby, he remained neutral, offering assistance rather than opinion, showing respect for internal harmony. He noticed eyes soften, not with approval, but recognition, as if something familiar surfaced within them. The test deepened when resources tightened and choices mattered more. He relinquished comfort readily, choosing the harder task because fairness demanded it. When asked to rest, he declined politely until others were settled, reflecting values he observed rather than borrowed. The injured recovered faster under steady care, and gratitude surfaced quietly in small gestures like shared smiles and nods. He accepted thanks without false modesty, acknowledging kindness with grace. Nights brought reflection where he assessed intentions, ensuring they remained clean of expectation. He understood that character here meant alignment between thought, action, and consequence without need for defense. The tribe measured sincerity through time, and he remained patient, trusting process over outcome. As days passed, boundaries eased naturally, granting him movement without escort, signaling confidence earned, not granted. He recognized that respect given freely returned multiplied, shaping bonds stronger than fear. Through helping, sharing, and honoring, he crossed an invisible threshold, entering a space where presence felt welcomed rather than tolerated. The test continued, yet he sensed progress etched into routine, confirming that true character spoke loudest when kindness arrived unrequested and respect stood unwavering. Subtle changes moved through the camp like a quiet tide, and he sensed tension loosening without announcement. Conversations paused less when he approached, and glances held longer, carrying questions rather than caution. The women began to notice patterns in him that challenged their expectations because fear thrives on unpredictability, and he had become steady. Curiosity replaced distance as they watched how he reacted when pressure rose and how calm followed instinctively. They spoke among themselves not about threat, but about motive, trying to understand the source of his restraint. He felt eyes studying him, not to judge guilt, but to measure sincerity, and that shift altered the air around him. Small invitations appeared, such as being asked to sit closer to the fire or share a task requiring trust. He accepted without assumption, knowing curiosity could fade if mishandled. Laughter emerged nearby and no longer stopped abruptly, signaling comfort growing where suspicion once lived. Women asked about his skills, not his past, seeking usefulness rather than confession. He answered plainly, letting actions confirm words. When children tugged at his sleeve, curiosity mirrored theirs, and he responded, gently earning quiet smiles. Fear that once guarded the circle softened into alert awareness balanced by interest. He noticed questions forming in their eyes about who he had been before loss shaped him. Instead of probing, they observed how he treated moments that offered advantage. He never claimed space, yet space began to open naturally. Trust is born where consistency lives, and curiosity followed that path carefully. One woman asked him to teach a simple repair technique and watched closely, not for mastery, but patience. When he guided without correction or pride, curiosity deepened into respect. The camp felt lighter, as if breath returned after long restraint. Stories surfaced around the fire, and though he listened more than spoke, he felt included through presence alone. Women discussed plans openly near him, which would not have happened before. He recognized curiosity carried risk because expectations could rise and disappointment could follow. He remained grounded, letting interest build at its own pace. He sensed they were comparing him not to strangers, but to memories of those who had harmed them. His difference lay not in words, but in choices repeated without fail. Fear fades when patterns prove safe, and curiosity grows when mystery invites understanding. He felt the weight of being observed, yet it no longer pressed against him. Instead, it connected him to the group, weaving him slowly into their awareness. Questions about his solitude surfaced quietly, and he answered honestly, acknowledging pain without bitterness. That vulnerability invited empathy, not pity. Curiosity expanded into dialogue shared through looks and gestures rather than interrogation. He realized hearts were opening cautiously because wounds remembered lessons. By remaining consistent, he honored those lessons rather than challenged them. The emotional shift did not happen suddenly, but through moments stacked carefully until fear stepped aside, allowing curiosity to lead. He understood that curiosity was a bridge, fragile yet powerful, and he walked it slowly, aware each step mattered. Time stretched quietly as the tribe observed him, not through words, but through glimpses of truth revealed in his actions and expressions. The lines around his eyes told stories they had not asked to hear, and yet understood instantly, because pain carries its own voice. They saw how he flinched at sudden noises, how silence sometimes pulled him deeper than the dark, and how his hands shook slightly when memories returned unbidden. Nights alone on the ranch had carved shadows into his posture, and he could not hide the weight he carried, though he tried. When he spoke about the land or tended fires, his tone carried a softness shaped by loss rather than hardness born of anger or cruelty. They watched how he moved through space with caution and respect, not because he feared them, but because he had learned the fragility of life through absence. One elder noticed the way he paused before touching the injured or offering help, as if understanding that kindness could never undo regret, but still mattered. Children sensed it too and stepped lightly around him, curious but careful, feeling that his heart held echoes of sorrow. Small gestures like adjusting a blanket or sharing warmth revealed a man shaped by solitude and loss, not violence, and each act deepened the tribe's awareness of him. At night, when fires flickered and shadows danced across the clearing, he quietly allowed grief to surface in his eyes, and the women did not look away. They whispered among themselves about his past, comparing it to their own scars, and realizing that survival sometimes comes with invisible wounds heavier than any sword could inflict. Even warriors who usually spoke with authority approached him gently, respecting the space that pain demanded. He never asked for sympathy nor sought attention. He simply existed among them with honesty, and that transparency became a bridge toward understanding. Every movement, every choice, carried weight because it revealed integrity forged through suffering rather than bravado. When he laughed quietly at a child's antics, it sounded fragile but genuine, and the contrast to his usual solemnity drew soft smiles from the women. He carried himself with humility, aware of his limitations and the lessons carved into his past, and that awareness became visible to all. Even when fatigue pressed against him or frustration lingered, he never lashed out, and that restraint spoke louder than words ever could. They realized he was not hardened by conflict, but tempered by loss, a man broken by life's cruelties, yet refusing bitterness. In moments alone, he stared at the sky, letting memories wash over him, and the tribe felt those memories as if they belonged to the land itself. By observing quietly, they understood that his loneliness was not emptiness, but a depth of feeling forged by love lost, by absence felt, and by the weight of living through grief. Each day revealed another layer, and slowly trust grew because they could see he offered himself honestly without pretense, allowing them to glimpse a soul wounded yet resilient, a heart capable of connection and empathy, proving that the strongest courage sometimes comes from enduring pain without letting it consume one entirely. Days passed slowly, yet each moment carried weight as he moved through the camp with quiet attentiveness, noticing needs before they were spoken and responding with subtle gestures that revealed care rather than performance. When a child dropped a tool, he bent quickly to retrieve it without hesitation, handing it back with steady hands and a soft word, and the woman nearby nodded slightly, as if a small seed had been planted. He shared firewood evenly, adjusting blankets for elders without asking, and never sought recognition, understanding that true trust is observed, not declared. When a storm passed and mud soaked the ground, he worked alongside others without complaint, carrying water, reinforcing shelters, and silently correcting small hazards that could have caused injury. Each act was unremarkable on its own, but compounded over time into a pattern that could not be ignored. Eyes that once held caution now followed him with subtle interest, and glances exchanged among the women carried questions rather than judgment. He helped an injured horse with patience and care, handling it as if understanding fear intimately, and that quiet competence impressed even the most skeptical among the tribe. When offered food, he shared with others without comment, never taking more than needed and always ensuring that no one went without. Children began to approach him willingly, their laughter softening the atmosphere, and elders lingered near when he spoke, listening to the careful tone of his voice rather than the words themselves. Small mistakes he made were corrected gently, and he accepted guidance without defensiveness, showing humility and willingness to learn, and each moment reaffirmed the quiet reliability that had begun to replace suspicion. During chores, he anticipated needs, arranging tools, carrying supplies, and completing tasks without waiting for instruction, demonstrating initiative that spoke louder than any declaration could. When a fire nearly went out, he rushed quietly to replenish it, balancing logs and tinder to maintain warmth for all, earning subtle nods and brief smiles of approval. He helped organize the communal spaces, clearing debris, adjusting seating, and smoothing paths to prevent falls, each action observed and noted by attentive eyes. Even in leisure, he participated with respect, listening, laughing at appropriate moments, and never dominating conversation or space. Gradually, hesitation in the tribe's gaze softened into acceptance. Subtle interactions multiplied trust more effectively than any formal gesture could. The women began to include him in discussions about daily work, sharing responsibilities and minor decisions, testing him not with words, but by watching how he contributed to harmony and safety. By acting consistently with care, patience, and humility, he transformed the tribe's perception from wary observer to reliable presence, proving through repeated small acts that character cannot be spoken into existence, but must be demonstrated and recognized silently. And in that recognition, he felt the first genuine sense of belonging he had experienced in years. A fragile but growing bridge between solitude and connection that could not be taken lightly. Time passed, and the subtle shifts in behavior became undeniable as one by one. The women's guarded hearts softened, not because affection had bloomed, but because respect had taken root through repeated acts of reliability and integrity. He moved among them with quiet attentiveness, never imposing, always observing, and acting with care that revealed understanding of their unspoken rules. When a child tripped, he caught her without hesitation and smiled briefly, acknowledging her without drawing attention to himself. And nearby, a woman's eyes lingered on him a moment longer, noting instinctive compassion rather than seeking reward. He carried water, tended fires, and shared food without comment, always anticipating needs and never asking for thanks. And through these consistent gestures, the tribe began to see him as more than a visitor or captive, but as someone whose presence could be trusted. When elders spoke about tasks or decisions, he offered help humbly, never asserting his opinion, but showing insight through observation and thoughtful action, and each silent contribution built layers of reliability they could depend on. Even small things, like adjusting blankets for the sick, tending animals with careful hands, or handling tools efficiently, became markers of his character, revealing patience, humility, and empathy that contrasted with the quick tempers or defensive stances they had grown accustomed to from outsiders. Nights around the fire carried new energy. Laughter became more natural when he joined in without overshadowing others, and conversations included him indirectly as women sought input on practical matters, testing him gently and noticing how he balanced respect with quiet initiative. He never manipulated, exaggerated, or performed. He simply responded to need, anticipated discomfort, and maintained composure in ways that spoke louder than words. And slowly, the recognition of his consistency replaced skepticism with cautious admiration. Bonds formed through observation rather than instruction, through shared effort rather than sentiment, and he realized that belonging could grow from integrity displayed over time rather than from charm or argument. The tribe watched how he handled fatigue, cold, and minor errors, noting resilience without complaint and willingness to support others without expectation. And those subtle decisions wove a pattern of dependability that touched every member, from the youngest to the oldest. In return, the women offered him space, guidance, and subtle signs of trust, like allowing him to handle responsibilities previously restricted or consulting him quietly on practical choices, and each acknowledgement strengthened an unspoken connection grounded in respect. He learned to respond to their cues, honor their rhythm, and maintain humility while contributing meaningfully, and the tribe recognized that this man, once a stranger, now embodied values they could count on in critical moments. Respect became the invisible bond that bridged his solitude with their collective strength, forming an alliance not born of affection but forged through demonstrated reliability, shared effort, and mutual understanding, a bond that held power without ceremony and significance without declaration. In every glance, every silent nod, and every shared responsibility, the layers of trust solidified, creating a network of interdependence that neither words nor promises could achieve. And by observing carefully and acting with unwavering integrity, he secured a place among them not as a guest, but as a part of the tribe's ongoing story, proving that respect, earned patiently and consistently, can transform fear into acknowledgement, distance into inclusion, and strangers into a community bound together by shared values and quiet, steadfast courage. The air in the clearing felt heavier that evening, charged with anticipation as the elders gathered silently while the tribe observed him without a word, their gazes weighing every motion he made, every breath he drew, because the moment had arrived when action would speak louder than observation, and the fate of his presence rested entirely in their hands. He stood quietly, aware that his every choice leading up to this instant had been measured, yet uncertainty pressed against his chest like a living thing, and the familiar rhythm of fear returned, subtle but sharp, reminding him that the consequences were real and irrevocable. The women whispered among themselves softly, their voices low and deliberate, not for him to hear, but to confirm understanding and alignment, for they alone held the power to determine whether his trial would end in rejection or acceptance. His posture remained calm, his hands relaxed at his sides, though inside a storm of emotions raged: hope, dread, longing, and the fragile confidence born of days spent proving himself through action rather than words. One elder stepped forward, silver hair catching the fading sun, her eyes fixed on him as though piercing through the layers he had worn for years, and her silence carried the weight of judgment heavier than any blade or rope. The tribe's young warriors watched with bated breath, sensing the importance of this decision, while the children lingered at a distance, curiosity tempered by instinct, understanding that the outcome would shape the rhythm of their world. He remembered the moments of doubt, the nights of loneliness, the small gestures that had gone unnoticed but had accumulated into a pattern of reliability, and he realized that every choice had led to this singular point where respect and trust would determine destiny. The elder spoke finally, not loudly, not in command, but with clarity that resonated in the stillness. Words of recognition that referenced deeds, patience, care, and integrity, making it clear that the tribe valued consistency, humility, and the courage to act rightly under observation. The women shifted, some nodding subtly, others lowering their eyes, the collective energy aligning toward a verdict that did not need declaration because it was reflected in the way they moved, the way they relaxed their stance, and the gentle gestures offered in acknowledgement of his presence. Acceptance was communicated quietly, yet unmistakably. A release from restraint, the removal of bindings, the allowance to move freely among them as a participant rather than a captive, and the subtle invitation to share in the tribe's routine, decisions, and responsibilities relief surged through him, raw and unexpected, mixing with gratitude and an understanding that this was not mercy alone, but recognition of character proven through consistency, courage, and empathy. The choice had been made, and it carried profound meaning. Punishment would have ended a life. Acceptance had begun a transformation, bridging the gap between outsider and community, fear and respect, isolation and belonging. As the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows stretched across the clearing, he felt a deep, unspoken connection solidify, a silent affirmation that the tribe's decision reflected not only judgment of the past, but hope for the future. A future in which he had earned a place not through words or plea, but through steady, honest action, proving that trust, patience, and integrity can turn captivity into kinship, suspicion into inclusion, and a lonely man into someone finally recognized as part of a living, breathing family. The morning sun broke over the horizon, and he felt the shift in the air immediately as the women moved with subtle grace, signaling that the moment had come when his trial would transform into freedom carried not by force, but by recognition. And as the bindings were removed from his wrists, he felt a weight lift not only physically, but from the years of solitude and fear that had shadowed him. For their gesture was deliberate, precise, and full of meaning, a language of respect that required no words to understand. He stepped forward cautiously, aware that every movement was still observed, yet now under the lens of acknowledgement rather than judgment. And the camp seemed to breathe with him as the elders and warriors formed a quiet circle, surrounding him not to threaten, but to witness the transition from captive to honored guest. Children approached with tentative curiosity, reaching hands that were met with gentle acceptance. And he understood in that moment that trust extended beyond obligation and into the realm of relationship, where every act of honesty, patience, and care had been counted and returned with dignity. Meals were offered without ceremony, yet each offering carried meaning. Food shared as equals, water handed with a nod, blankets adjusted with care, and gestures that communicated inclusion into the rhythms of daily life rather than enforced compliance. His heart raced as he realized that every step forward, every motion he had taken in service or attentiveness, had culminated in this acknowledgement, and the firelight reflected not only on his face, but in the eyes of the tribe, soft with respect and quiet pride in the man who had proven himself through action rather than words. They allowed him to move freely among them, handle tools, tend fires, and participate in chores and decisions, not as a test, but as affirmation, a silent promise that his presence was valued and that he belonged in their midst, not by accident, but through merit demonstrated in patience, empathy, and humility. As he assisted in small tasks, guided children, and contributed to the daily routine, he felt the barrier of fear that once separated him from connection dissolve, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of community, where acknowledgement of character carried more weight than lineage, strength, or claim. Elders nodded subtly as he spoke. Warriors acknowledged his competence without commentary, and the women who had once watched with caution now included him naturally in conversation and decision, their subtle smiles signaling that he had crossed from outsider into trusted presence. Evening fell, and the fires burned brighter, shadows dancing over faces that no longer regarded him with suspicion, and he realized that honor was more powerful than freedom alone, for it carried responsibility, mutual recognition, and the chance to participate fully in life he had once faced only as a solitary observer. Gratitude welled in him not as pleading or need, but as understanding that the path to belonging had been earned through deeds, humility, and quiet courage. And in that earned honor he found a peace that he had never known before. The knowledge that a life once shadowed by loss and solitude now carried a place among people who valued him truly, fully, and with enduring respect, transforming captivity into kinship, fear into trust, and a lonely existence into one defined by purpose, connection, and dignity that would shape him forever. The rancher rode away as the sun dipped low, his silhouette cutting through the wilderness. Yet he carried more than freedom. He carried understanding, humility, and a heart reshaped by the women who had seen through his fear to the man beneath. Every step he took echoed lessons learned in silence, in observation, in the small acts of courage and kindness that had earned him respect where weapons could not. Behind him, the tribe watched quietly, their eyes reflecting both caution and awe, realizing that strength is not in domination or force, but in gentleness that commands trust. The land felt different now, less wild, because hearts had met without violence and boundaries had been crossed without fear. In that fragile connection, they discovered a truth that would linger in memory long after he disappeared into the horizon. A gentle heart can conquer fear, even in the harshest, untamed places, and courage is measured not by power, but by the capacity to act with honor, empathy, and unwavering integrity.